And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder, and it's great to have everybody here on this Thursday, December 28th. We have a lot to talk about on the show today, but before I get into that, I just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate and get your comments recognized, make sure to go to the following link. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, that really helps the show, makes the show more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Again, that is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And as always, this is displayed on the ticker on the bottom of the show segment down below. So with that, let's get right into what we were going to talk about for today. So starting off the show, we're going to talk about recent news from yesterday. We had some quarterback changes, and most notably, one of them was Russell Wilson being benched. So it's going to be Jarrett Stidham getting the start on Sunday. So we'll get into that in a second. Then in the second part of the show, we'll go through the power rankings that were released this week. Obviously, being off on Monday pushed everything back a day, so we'll get into that. We'll talk about the current standings, where everything is currently at the moment in both conferences. And then we will preview tonight's Thursday night matchup between the New York Jets and the Cleveland Browns. So let's get right into the first topic, which is talking about Russell Wilson being benched. So it wasn't just him. There were a couple of other quarterback changes. So there'll be no more Tommy Cutlets. It'll be Tyrod Taylor starting on Sunday against the Rams. And then you also have, for the Commanders, you have Jacoby Brissett taking over for Sam Howell at quarterback against the 49ers. And then you have Jarrett Stidham taking over for Russell Wilson, which is what we're going to talk about as they get ready to take on the LA Chargers. And it definitely is a little bit. Now, you look at the reason for it, so you understand it. But kind of curious move because the Broncos are still technically in the playoff hunt. I think I went over their odds, I think, yesterday. But, they have like a 1.4% chance of making the playoffs, something like that. It's ridiculously low now, especially after losing to the Patriots. And that kind of like sealed Russ's fate, I guess, with the Broncos. Now, it's really from a financial standpoint as to why the Broncos benched him. So he's going to be owed a lot of money. He had a big contract. And the reason for it is, so he's guaranteed $39 million in 2024, whether he's with the team or not. But it's the $37 million that could be guaranteed if he doesn't pass a physical in early March. So if Russ got injured in the final two games, then the Broncos would have to owe him that money. So they don't want to take their chances. So that's why they're benching him, which, again, makes sense. From a financial standpoint, it makes sense. But when you look at the Broncos, again, they still technically have a chance to make the playoffs, and now you're kind of just, punting on the season because now you're putting in Jarrett Stidham. And this is something similar to what the Raiders did with Derek Carr. And the thing that's funny about it is that when the Raiders did it to Derek Carr last year, Jarrett Stidham was the quarterback that replaced him. So now he's replacing Russell Wilson. And on top of that, it's also in the same division. Same division. I mean, you could even look at Josh McDaniels. He was the head coach of the Broncos at one point. Now he's not the one that made this decision. But it's just, the funny thing is that Jarrett Stidham is replacing yet another quarterback in this division. And it was basically a year apart. Because again, this happened last year. I mean, it's that trade that the Broncos made with the Seahawks really just did not pay off. And, Russell Wilson really was not Sean Payton's guy. I mean, Sean Payton inherited Russell Wilson. He tried his best to try to, fix him. And listen, Russell Wilson really hasn't had a bad season. It really hasn't been. He's not really the main problem with this team. This team has other issues, but it just really didn't pan out. because I think there definitely has been a drop off, obviously from his days in Seattle. Not the same player, because this is a guy that basically carried some of these Seahawks teams. Obviously when the Legion of Boom was no longer a thing, and the defense wasn't as good. Russell Wilson carried the Seahawks. 2018 they had a team that really wasn't that good, and they were able to make the playoffs, and that was because of him. But a lot of people credit Pete Carroll, because look at what Russell Wilson has been since he's left Seattle. He's not the same quarterback. And I was one of those people that was, high on Denver. I thought Denver was going to be a good team. He was joining a team that had a good defense, and, he had some receivers that you thought could take it to the next level now with an actual quarterback, because, Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton, they've gone through so many quarterbacks. Finally they had somebody that you thought was going to be, someone you could trust. And that really wasn't the case. They just really never got it going. Again, I think, Russ has had a decent season. He's definitely been better than what he was last year, but it's not really up to the standard that we're accustomed to seeing, from all those years in Seattle. So, again, from a financial standpoint, makes sense. I think the fans are disappointed just because, they think they still technically have a chance. You're playing Easton Stick and the Chargers. That's a winnable game. And then the Raiders, who knows? You could win that game, finish 9-8. And if a lot of things go your way, maybe you somehow squeak in. But, losing to the Patriots definitely, sealed his fate. They should have won that game. But again, Sean Payton, Bill Belichick owns Sean Payton. And we saw that once again. So you look at what Russ is going to finish with. So he passed for a little over 3,000 yards. So he passed for 3,070 yards, 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, and a 98 QB rating. He also had 3 rushing touchdowns on the season. So the numbers aren't bad. Now, where can he go? Well, there's plenty of teams that need a quarterback. You could look at, the Titans. They might keep Will Levis, but I know that was one team that people were maybe thinking about. The Falcons. The Falcons definitely could be a team that he could go to. There was a list that I saw on social media. Falcons are one of them. The Giants, you could throw them in there too. There are some teams out there that could need a quarterback. Maybe even... Actually, no, I shouldn't say the Colts because they got Anthony Richardson coming back. But the Falcons and the Giants, more so the Falcons, because, or maybe the Vikings, we'll see what happens with Kirk Cousins, but I don't know. It's going to be interesting. And, Russell Wilson tweeted something out last night with all the speculation that he was going to be cut. He's going to be cut after the season, it seems. So, this was a failure, this trade, because, again, when it first went down, I thought the Broncos were going to be a really good team, but that just never really happened. Nathaniel Hackett was not a good head coach. Russ did not have a good year. And again, it was better this year, but still, the offense, there was always something off, and especially when you get into shootouts with a lot of these teams. Like when they got into a shootout with, well, not really a shootout, but, when you're going up against, when they went up against the Texans, and the Texans, were up, you just never felt like the Broncos were going to win that game. It ended up being a close game, and they were going down the field to win the game, but then Russ threw the interception in the end zone to Troutman when he was trying to hit Troutman. You just never really felt like they were going to win that game. The Lions too. Once it was 14-0. The Broncos weren't coming back. They can't. They're a team that can't play from behind. So it just, if they're, like I said, if they got to get in a shootout, they're not going to win that game. But he's I don't think he's the main problem here. you look at the wide receivers. I mean, Sutton had a good year, but you don't really look at them as some top wide receivers in the league. The running game's kind of been a disappointment. Javonte Williams really hasn't. Again, I think give him another year, to recover from the ACL, and then maybe he'll be back to how he was before the injury. Yeah, I mean, and the defense, still hasn't. It definitely has been better since the 70-point game against the Dolphins, but still, it's got its issues. So, but it's going to be rebuilt in Sean Payton's image, And again, he inherited Russell Wilson, and you could tell that relationship really wasn't the best, especially when you saw, against the Lions, him yelling at, Russ on the sideline. So, yeah, it always seemed like it never really was a good fit. And now Russ is gonna have to find a new home, and he'll get picked up by somebody. Somebody's gonna pick him up. I think he still has he definitely still has gas left in the tank. Maybe in the right situation, but it just wasn't a good fit here, And if he goes somewhere else and he pretty much does the same thing like he did in Denver, then you really got to look at Seattle and be like, well, they really turned him into. They were really the reason why he was successful. But I mean, he's getting older now. He's in his mid-30s. I mean, I think he still has gas left in the tank, but how much really? But yeah, the Broncos. It looks like they're not going to the playoffs once again. Again, a disappointing end to this because again, you expected better. You really did, but things just kind of went backwards. And now Sean Payton's there, and he's going to try to. Rebuild this team. Again, in his own image, they're going to get their quarterback. I don't know how they're going to do that, but we'll see. But it doesn't look like Russell Wilson is going to be a part of that. And he will be looking for a new home in 2024. And it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But let me know what you guys think. Where does Russell Wilson end up if he is cut by the Broncos? Well, most likely going to get cuts, but where does he end up if it's not with the Broncos? So with that, we are going to take our first break of the show, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the power rankings that are released this week. I'll go through them. I'll give you my thoughts on them, and that is what we will do when we come back from our first break of the show. So with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.